Today I decided to give you guys a ranking of the Planet of the Apes franchise. This is an interesting series of films that started in the late 1960s and is ongoing to this day. There hasn't been a new film in a few years, but Hollywood does plan on making one from what I've read, and hopefully it continues the most recent trilogy. But regardless, I figured without further ado, I'd give my ranking from worst to best. I actually had a poll on my channel saying which series I should do next. It was between this and Ghostbusters, and it was essentially got tied in the poll. So I'll do this one first and then Ghostbusters. So let's get started. Coming in last place is 1970's Beneath the Planet of the Apes. This is not a good film. It essentially is the first sequel in the series to the original film. It does have Charlton Heston in it, who was also in the first film, but he's a side character this time around. Essentially, you see a group of psychic humans living under the Earth, and they plan to blow up the Earth with this nuclear device. It's just kind of strange and kind of cheap. The effects are kind of bad. Nothing about the film is exceptional. It feels like a lazy sequel through and through, and one that I only recommend to hardcore Apes fans. Coming in at number 8 is Tim Burton's remake of Planet of the Apes. This film starred Mark Wahlberg as well as Chris Christopherson, and it has basically the same plot as the original, only there's more ape politics this time around. There's also some strange humor, some really hammy performances. Paul Giamatti's an ape in the movie, and he's pretty good, and Michael Clarke Duncan's an ape as well. But there's just nothing about this film that sticks out. The only thing I really like about the movie is that they still use practical ape effects instead of CGI, and the apes do look pretty good, and the actors give a good performance underneath all the makeup. Also, it's the last Planet of the Apes film that featured Charlton Heston, who plays an ape this time around. Sorry about that. Coming in at number 7 is 1973's Battle for the Planet of the Apes. This, chronologically, is the last Planet of the Apes film. It is a decent finale. It does have a good message of the humans and apes learning to coexist with each other, which I do like, and that seems like a proper way to end the franchise. However, there's nothing really special about the film. It does really lack in the action. Roddy McDowall comes back yet again to play Caesar, and he does a good job in this whole franchise. He plays several apes throughout the franchise. But ultimately, just an okay film, nothing really special. Which leads us to number 6, a film that is very enjoyable, and that is Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. This film basically sees the apes rising up against the humans and taking over the planet, or at least they begin to take over the planet here. It's an interesting film, and essentially it's, Rise of the Planet of the Apes before Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and it's one that I actually rather enjoy. A fun film that has a lot of philosophical questions in it, and more action than the one that came before it, but not as great as some of the higher ones up in this list. Coming in at number 5 is 2011's Rise of the Planet of the Apes. This film is the first in the new trilogy of films, and it actually serves as a prequel to the original series of films. A lot of people don't know that, but the new trilogy of films is actually a prequel series that does acknowledge the events of the original 5 films. This is the first in that series, and I do like this one. The only downside of this one is the action only really hits in the last 30 minutes. The story's nice, and it's kind of sad at times, kind of deep at times too. Talks about Alzheimer's and stuff like that, which is kind of depressing. And that's basically what leads to the medicine that actually makes the apes really smart. A fun movie with a lot of philosophical ideas, and it's the first time around the apes are CGI, but because of that you lose some of that charm. I do prefer people in costumes instead of CGI, but the CGI is decent. Not as good as some of the later films. It's a little dated. This film is 11 years old now, but still an enjoyable entry, just not one that I love. Kind of low replay value, but it's alright. Coming in at number 4 is 1971's Escape from the Planet of the Apes. I love this film, and I think it's really great. This one is basically the inverse of the first film. Whereas the first film, a human ends up on a planet that's entirely apes, ape ruled, that is, and humans are basically subservient to the apes. This film is about the apes showing up on Earth in the past, and unlike Tanner from the first film, they're actually, at first at least, accepted by the humans and seen as something of like a spectacle. It's like, hey, look how cool these talking apes are. But unfortunately, although it's a nice inverse at first, eventually things turn sour and it leads to violence and people trying to kill the apes as they try to escape the planet. Well, really just escape the humans. And the title is actually rather misleading because they escape the planet of the apes in the first minute of the movie. But the film ends with them on the run trying to protect their future, well, the soon-to-be, I guess you say, ruler of the world, Caesar, from the humans. An interesting plot through and through, and I do love how it flips the story on its head, and one that I rather enjoy. Coming in at number 3 is 2014's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. This was a solid follow-up to Rise, and it has a lot more action, better characters, I feel, much better special effects. The apes look much better this time around, probably because the film came out a few years later, and it had a much bigger budget. This is probably the most action-packed of the franchise, but I do think the middle chapter, the second act, is a little bit, kind of drags a bit, but it does pick up in the finale, and it's an enjoyable film through and through. Although, much like the first film, not the highest replay value on this one. Which leads me to number, is it 2, I believe? And that would be War for the Planet of the Apes. I actually rather enjoy this film. This is my favorite of the new trilogy. Some people actually do prefer Dawn, and I kind of get it. Dawn did have Koba, who was this amazing evil ape who hates humanity, and understandably so, because he was basically tested in scientists' experiments his whole life, tested on. And so he wants to get revenge, and that's pretty awesome. This time around, you don't have Koba, though. You just have a human villain played by Woody Harrelson, who does a damn good job. I would say that's the only thing about this movie I don't like about as much as Dawn, but everything else I think is much better. I think the pacing is better, the visual effects are better, the story is better. I feel more for the characters. The humans are not nearly as much of a focal point as they were in the first two films. It's really about the apes this time around, which is why I really enjoy it. There are human characters, mind you, but they're not what this movie's about. It's about the apes through and through, and this is the first film that really focuses on the apes, and exclusively on the apes, whereas the humans are just basically the villains. Apart from one character, this girl named Nova, well, they give her the name Nova anyway, which is a nod to the original series. A solid film through and through, and a great ending to this trilogy, and I hope if they do make another Planet of the Apes film, they continue off of this one. Which leads me to number 1, and no surprises here, 1968's Planet of the Apes. I love this film. It stars Charlton Heston as a astronaut/scientist who lands on a planet which he finds out is inhabited by apes, only to find out that the planet is much more familiar than he realizes. This film has a lot of philosophical questions and a lot of great acting from all the characters. The ape masks, while a little dated by today's standards, were very impressive for the late 1960s, and they still look cool as hell. You can't beat that classic ape look with like the protruding mouths and all that, and the words that don't quite match up because the makeup is a little bit dated, but you gotta love that look. I mean, tell me that don't look like Che Guevara. Come on. You gotta love the classic apes look, and I do love that about this film. Everything about the movie is entertaining. The story is great. The characters are great. The acting is phenomenal. Charlton Heston really brings his A game, and this is the most impressive and entertaining film of the franchise. The best one out was the first one out, which is true for a lot of franchises, but it's definitely true for this one as well. I love this film, and I highly recommend it to anyone who loves good sci-fi and good cinema. Well, that's my list. Sorry for the little bit more longer-winded video here, but I had a lot to say about these. I do enjoy all these films, and I kind of hope that if they do another one, that maybe, and it's a long shot, but maybe they'll do people in suits again. But regardless, I'd love to see another film, and I do love these films, and I think this is a very underrated franchise. Thank you all for watching, and peace out.